You are a master cartographer of other people's hearts. You have memorized the terrain of their emotions with the precision of someone who has spent years studying every contour, every shadow. You know which roads lead to their joy, which alleyways dead end in their sorrow. You can predict the weather patterns of their moods before they can. You understand the geography of their needs better than they understand it themselves. You remember the small things, the way she takes her coffee, the topic that makes his voice tighten with old pain, the time of year when they grow quiet, when the anniversary of something unspoken approaches like a storm on the horizon. You are the one who remembers birthdays, who notices when someone has stopped laughing the way they used to, who can read the geography of exhaustion in a text message that says, "I'm fine." You navigate your days according to these maps. You plan your route through conversations, through evenings, through your own life by the landmarks of other people's comfort. There is a strange pride in this, a quiet competence. You are needed. You are the one who listens when everyone else has stopped paying attention, the one who stays up late when someone needs to talk, the one who rearranges your schedule, your plans, your boundaries to make room for someone else's crisis. You carry their worries like stones in your pockets. You hold their secrets like fragile glass. You have become so good at reading their maps that you can walk their terrain with your eyes closed. But there is another map, one that stays folded in a drawer you rarely open, the map of your own interior landscape, the territory of your own needs, your own desires, your own quiet longings that hum beneath the surface of your carefully curated availability. When was the last time you paused long enough to unfold it? When was the last time you asked yourself not what someone else needs from you, but what you need for yourself? What do you want? Not what would make them happy, or what would keep peace, or what would prove your worth. What do you actually want? The question lands in your chest like a stone dropped into a well. You wait for the sound of it hitting bottom. You wait for an answer to echo back. But there is only silence. Only the strange, disorienting realization that you cannot remember the last time you consulted your own map, that when you try to locate yourself on it, you find vast stretches of unmarked territory, blank spaces where your needs should be charted, white expanses where your boundaries should be drawn. The landmarks of your own desires have faded from neglect, eroded by years of not being visited, not being honored, not being remembered. This forgetting did not happen overnight. It happened slowly, imperceptibly, the way a path disappears when no one walks it, the way a language is lost when no one speaks it. You did not decide one day to abandon yourself. You simply learned very early that survival meant keeping others mapped, keeping others stable, keeping others satisfied, that your own coordinates were less important than theirs, that the safest way to be loved was to make yourself small enough to fit entirely inside their needs. This is not virtue. This is not selflessness. This is not the noble sacrifice that the world sometimes calls it. This is something quieter and more painful. This is a form of self-abandonment that has learned to dress itself up as kindness. And it begins like so many patterns of survival, long before you had words for what was happening. Long before you understood that you were drawing a map of everyone's world but your own. The world has taught you to call this love, to call it generosity, to call it being a good person, a good partner, a good friend, a good daughter, a good son. The world gives medals to people who forget themselves for others. It writes poems about self-sacrifice. It builds monuments to those who give until there is nothing left. And so you have learned to wear your self-erasure like a badge of honor, never questioning whether honor should cost you your own existence. But there is a difference between conscious giving and habitual self-denial. One flows from fullness, the other flows from fear. One is a choice made in the light of day. The other is a reflex, learned in the dark when you were too young to understand what you were learning, too small to resist the lesson being carved into your nervous system. Psychologists have names for this: self-sacrifice schema, high-functioning codependency, compulsive caretaking. The words sound clinical, sterile, like diagnoses that belong to someone else. But they are simply attempts to map a territory that millions of people inhabit without knowing it has a name. A pattern of thought and behavior so deeply rooted that it feels like identity itself. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not too sensitive or too much or not enough. You are someone who learned a very specific lesson about survival, and that lesson has been running your life ever since. The lesson is this: need is dangerous. Not intellectually dangerous, not philosophically dangerous. Dangerous in the way that fire is dangerous to someone who has been burned. dangerous in the way that heights are dangerous to someone who has fallen. Your nervous system learned very early that expressing a need led to one of three unbearable outcomes: rejection, conflict, or the terrible weight of knowing you had become a burden to someone you loved. And so you learned to stop having needs, or rather you learned to stop acknowledging them. They did not disappear. Needs do not disappear. They are written into the biology of being human, but you learned to silence them before they reached your lips, to strangle them in your throat before they could become words, to bury them so deep that even you forgot they were there. This is not selflessness. This is self-protection. It is the strategy of a child who discovered that the safest way to navigate a dangerous or unpredictable world was to make themselves smaller, quieter, less demanding, to become the one who soothes rather than the one who needs soothing, to become the one who holds space rather than the one who takes up space, to become the solution rather than the problem. The child grows up. The environment changes, the danger passes, but the strategy remains hardwired into the architecture of how you relate to yourself and others. You no longer need to hide your needs to survive, but you have forgotten how to do anything else. The pattern has become identity. The survival mechanism has become personality. And now, decades later, you find yourself unable to answer the simplest question: what do you need right now? Because to acknowledge a need is to sound an alarm. Even here, even now, even in the safety of this moment, your body tenses at the thought. Your chest tightens. A voice whispers the old warnings. If you ask for something, they will leave. If you want something, you will become a burden. If you need something, you will shatter the careful equilibrium you have spent your life maintaining. Better to stay quiet, better to stay small, better to need nothing at all. And so you have become an expert at reading everyone's map but your own. You have memorized their needs with such precision that you no longer have room to remember yours. You have made yourself so essential to everyone else that you have become inessential to yourself. You have loved others so thoroughly that you have forgotten how to love the one person who has been there all along, patient and silent, waiting for you to remember their name. The forgetting did not begin with you. It began long before you had language for what was happening. Long before you understood that childhood is supposed to be a time when someone else holds the map, when someone else does the navigating, when your only job is to be small and curious and allowed to need. But for some children, the map is reversed. The child becomes the cartographer. The child becomes the one who must chart the emotional terrain of the adults around them, who must learn to predict and manage and soothe the very people who should be doing that for them. Psychologists call this parentification. The quiet theft of childhood that happens when a child is forced to become emotionally older than their years. You learn to read your mother's face for signs of the sadness that would swallow the day. You learn to monitor your father's tone for the edge that meant anger was coming. You learn to be small and helpful and easy when there was chaos. You learn to be the peacekeeper, the mediator, the one who made everything okay. And in learning this, you absorbed a terrible equation. Your value lies in your usefulness to others. Your needs are less important than their stability. Your worth is measured by how little trouble you cause. The child who learns this does not forget it. The lesson calcifies into bone, becomes the foundation upon which every future relationship is built. You grow up, you leave that home, but you carry the map with you and you keep reading other people's terrain with the hypervigilance of someone who learned that survival depended on it. Or perhaps you grew up in a different kind of landscape, not one of emotional fragility, but one of chaos, addiction, mental illness, violence that arrived without warning, or silence that stretched for days like a held breath. In this terrain, nothing was predictable, nothing was safe. The ground shifted beneath you constantly, and you learned that the only thing you could control was yourself. So you controlled everything about yourself, your emotions, your behavior, your needs, especially your needs, because needing something meant depending on an environment that could not be depended on. Needing something meant vulnerability in a place where vulnerability was dangerous. And so you learned to need nothing, to want nothing, to make yourself an island in the storm, self-sufficient and sealed off. The child who survives chaos by erasing their own needs becomes the adult who cannot remember how to have them. Or perhaps the landscape was quieter, more insidious. Perhaps you grew up in a home where love was a prize to be earned, where affection was dispensed only when you performed correctly, when you brought home good grades, when you behaved, when you made them proud. When you did not cry, did not complain, did not ask for too much. The love was there, but it had conditions attached like fine print you could not quite read. And so you learned to split yourself in two. There was the real you, messy and needing and imperfect, and there was the performed you, the one who earned love by being easy and accomplished and never too much. You learned that the real you was not lovable, that the only version of yourself that deserved care was the one that required none. You have spent your life perfecting that performance, and somewhere along the way, you forgot it was a performance at all. Or perhaps what was missing was simpler, but no less devastating. Perhaps no one ever mirrored you. When you felt sad, no one said, "You're sad, aren't you? That's okay." When you felt angry, no one said, "I see you're upset, tell me about it." When you felt afraid, no one said, "You're scared, I'm here." The emotional vocabulary that should have been taught to you, the validation that should have anchored your inner world, simply never came. And so, you grew up doubting your own interior landscape. You learned that your emotions were unreliable, excessive wrong. You learned not to trust your own feelings because no one ever confirmed they were real. The child who is never mirrored becomes the adult who cannot see themselves, who looks to others for permission to feel what they feel, to need what they need to exist in the way they exist. Or perhaps you learned it by watching. Perhaps you grew up in a home where self-sacrifice was a family heirloom passed down like a precious tradition. You watched your mother give until she was empty. You watched your father work until he disappeared into exhaustion. You watched love expressed as endless service, as martyrdom, as the slow erosion of self for the sake of others. And you absorbed the lesson without question. This is what love looks like. This is what goodness requires. To love is to sacrifice. To care is to forget yourself. You inherited the pattern without understanding its cost. You carried it forward with pride, with reverence, never questioning whether love should require the complete abandonment of your own needs. Never asking whether the people who taught you this were happy, or whether they too were simply passing on a wound they had received from someone else. These are the origins. Different paths to the same destination. Different reasons for learning the same lesson, that you are safest when you need nothing, that you are most lovable when you ask for nothing, that your place in the world is secured by forgetting you have a place at all. There is a myth about people who give endlessly. The myth says they are happy. The myth says they are fulfilled by their service, warmed by their generosity, sustained by the simple joy of making others comfortable. The myth says that self-sacrifice is its own reward, that there is a kind of spiritual peace in dissolving yourself into the needs of others. But if you are honest, if you sit with yourself in the quiet hours when no one is asking anything of you, you know the truth. You know about the other thing that lives inside you, the thing you are not supposed to admit, the thing that makes you feel small and petty and wrong. The resentment, it comes slowly at first. A flicker of irritation when someone takes without thanking. A tightness in your chest when you realize you have given up another evening, another plan, another small piece of yourself, and no one noticed. A whisper of bitterness when you watch someone else receive the care you provide to everyone but never ask for yourself. You push it down. You tell yourself you are being selfish for even feeling it. You remind yourself that you give freely, that you do not keep score, that love is not a transaction. And this is true. You do give freely. But freedom does not mean you do not feel the cost. It does not mean you do not notice that the giving only flows in one direction. It does not mean you do not, in the deepest part of yourself, long to be seen the way you see others, to be remembered the way you remember, to be cared for with the same attention you give. But you do not say this. You cannot say this, because to say it would be to admit you have needs, and needs are the thing you have spent your life learning to bury. And so the resentment grows in the dark, fed by every unacknowledged sacrifice, every unreciprocated gesture, every moment you swallowed your own disappointment to protect someone else's comfort. It accumulates like sediment at the bottom of a river, invisible but heavy, slowly poisoning the very waters you are trying to keep clear. The people who give the most are often the ones who resent the most. Not because they are cruel, but because they are human. Because they have needs they will not name and longings they will not voice, and the gap between what they give and what they allow themselves to receive becomes unbearable. And there is something else. Something keener but no less devastating. When you spend your life meeting other people's needs, when you build your identity around being useful, being needed, being the one who solves and soothes and supports you, forget who you are when no one needs you. Your sense of self erodes. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, imperceptibly, like a shoreline disappearing under rising water. You know what you do for others. You know what you mean to them. But if someone asks who you are separate from your service, separate from your role, separate from your usefulness, you find yourself grasping at nothing. What do you like? You are not sure anymore. What do you want? The question feels foreign. What brings you joy when no one is watching, when no one needs anything from you, when your only responsibility is to yourself? You do not know. You have not checked in so long that the answers have faded. You have spent so many years being a mirror for others that you have forgotten what your own face looks like. And this is when something strange happens. This is when the pattern reveals its cruelest dimension. When you have forgotten how to honor your own needs, when you have made yourself into someone whose only purpose is to serve you, begin to attract people who will take everything you offer and ask for more. Not because they are evil, not because they set out to use you, but because the universe has a way of matching people to the roles they perform. You become a magnet for those who take without thinking, for those who assume your availability is infinite, for those who do not ask if you have the energy, the time, the emotional space, because you never indicate that you might not. Your generosity trains them to expect it. Your silence about your limits teaches them you have none. And so you find yourself surrounded by people who need you but do not see you, who love what you do for them but do not know who you are beneath the doing. This is not their fault, though it feels like it sometimes. This is the inevitable result of a life built around self-erasure. When you make yourself invisible, people learn not to look for you. When you present yourself as someone without needs, people believe you. When you give the same answer every time someone asks if you are okay, they stop asking. And you wake up one day in a life where you are essential to everyone and known by no one. Where you are surrounded by people and profoundly alone. Where you give and give and give, and somehow, impossibly, you are still empty. The way back to yourself does not begin with grand declarations or dramatic transformations. It does not begin with burning down your life or abandoning everyone who needs you. It does not require you to become selfish or hard or closed off. The way back begins with something so small you might miss it if you are not paying attention. It begins with a single question, not the big one, not the overwhelming "what do I want from my life?" That question is too vast, too terrifying for someone who has spent years in exile from their own desires. That question looks like a mountain you do not have the strength to climb. Start smaller. Start so small, it feels almost meaningless. Start with this moment, right now. In the next 5 minutes, what do you want? Do you want to sit or stand? Do you want silence or sound? Do you want tea or water or nothing at all? Do you want the window open or closed? Do you want to stay in this room or walk into another one? These are not trivial questions. These are the first lines of the map you are learning to draw again. Because before you can know what you want from your life, you must remember how to know what you want from a single moment. You must rebuild the muscle of checking in with yourself, the habit of pausing long enough to ask, and then more importantly, the practice of honoring whatever answer comes. At first, there may be no answer. You may ask yourself what you want and hear only static, only the blank space where your preferences used to be. This is normal. This is what happens when you have not consulted yourself in years. The connection has gone quiet, but it is not gone. It is simply waiting for you to remember how to listen. So you practice. You ask the small questions. You make the small choices. And slowly, incrementally, you begin to hear yourself again. And then you do something that may feel strange, even selfish. You schedule time with yourself the way you would schedule time with anyone else you care about. You open your calendar and you block out 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. You mark it as non-negotiable. You treat it with the same respect you would treat a doctor's appointment or a meeting with someone important, because you are someone important. The most important appointment you have is the one with yourself. During this time, you do not productivity. You do not catch up on tasks or answer emails or clean the house or do anything that serves anyone else's agenda. You do something for no reason other than it pleases you. You read a page of a book. You listen to a song that makes you feel something. You sit by a window and watch the light change. You do nothing at all, and you do not apologize for it. This will feel uncomfortable at first, wasteful, indulgent. The voices that taught you to forget yourself will rise up with their old arguments. You should be doing something useful. Someone might need you. This is selfish, but you stay anyway. You stay in the discomfort. You stay in the appointed time. You practice the radical act of honoring a commitment you made to yourself, and you learn a new word. The word is pause. When someone asks something of you, when someone needs something, when the old reflex rises up to say yes automatically, without thought, without checking if you have anything left to give you pause, you say, "Let me think about it." You say, "Let me check my schedule." You say, "I need a moment." This pause is not rejection. It is not cruelty. It is the space between the request and your response where you get to check in with yourself, where you get to ask, do I have the energy for this? Do I want to do this? Will this serve me or only deplete me? The pause is where you remember that you get to choose. That yes is a choice, not a reflex. That you are allowed to consult your own needs before you commit to meeting someone else's. At first, the pause will feel impossible. The old urgency will press on you. The guilt will whisper that making someone wait is making them suffer, but you practice anyway. You insert the pause. You buy yourself the seconds you need to remember that you exist in this equation too. And then you listen to the part of you that has been speaking all along, the part you learned to ignore, your body. When your mind has gone numb to your needs, when you have trained yourself not to feel your own exhaustion or frustration or overwhelm, your body keeps score. It speaks in sensations, tension in your shoulders, tightness in your jaw, a headache that will not leave, fatigue that sleep does not cure, pain in places that have no clear injury. These are not random. These are not weaknesses. These are signals. Your body is trying to tell you that something is wrong, that a need is being ignored, that a boundary is being crossed. You have been treating these signals as inconveniences, as problems to be managed, so you can keep giving. But they are messages. They are your body's way of saying, rest please, space please, no please, enough please. You learn to listen. You learn to interpret. You learn that the knot in your stomach when you agree to something is not anxiety to be overcome, but wisdom to be honored. That the way your breath shallows when someone asks for more is your nervous system telling you that you have reached your limit. There is an image you have heard before, one that has become so familiar it has lost its power. But today let it land differently. Let it mean something. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You have heard this said to other people. You have probably said it to other people. But you have never applied it to yourself, have you? Because you learned long ago to keep pouring even when the cup was empty. You learned to scrape the bottom. You learned to give what you did not have. You learned that running dry was not permission to stop, it was simply the condition under which you continued. But here is what that costs. When you give from emptiness, what you give is not nourishment. It is the residue of depletion. It is resentment disguised as generosity. It is exhaustion pretending to be love. The people you care for deserve more than that. They deserve your presence, not your performance. They deserve your genuine care, not your martyrdom. And you cannot give them that when you have abandoned yourself. Caring for yourself is not the opposite of caring for others. It is the foundation. It is the only way the caring becomes sustainable, becomes real, becomes something other than a slow self-destruction dressed up as virtue. When you learn to honor your own needs, you do not become selfish. You become whole. And wholeness has so much more to offer than brokenness ever could. But the journey back to yourself is not a straight line. It is not a decision you make once and then it is done. It is a practice you return to again and again, especially in the moments when the old patterns rise up with their old arguments. There will be days when you honor a boundary and then spend hours drowning in guilt. Days when you say no and feel like you have committed an act of violence. Days when you take time for yourself and hear the voices of everyone who taught you that your needs do not matter. This is part of the journey. The guilt is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It is evidence that you are doing something different. It is the old pattern fighting to survive, and you do not have to let it win. You can feel the guilt and still keep the boundary. You can notice the fear and still honor the need. You can hear the old voices and still choose differently, because here is the truth that no one taught you. Caring for others may be your instinct, your training, your inheritance, but learning to care for yourself is your destiny. It is the work you came here to do, not because you are broken, but because you are human. Not because you failed at selflessness, but because selflessness was never supposed to mean self-erasure. The person you have been searching for, in every act of service, in every gesture of care, in every moment of putting someone else first, has been waiting for you all along. They have been patient, they have been quiet, they have watched you forget them 1,000 times, and they have not stopped waiting. They are still there right now in the stillness beneath your breath, the one who knows what you need. The one who remembers what you love, the one who has always been there, even when you could not see them, even when you did not know their name. You are allowed to come home to them. You are allowed to remember them. You are allowed to care for them with the same fierce attention you have given to everyone else. This is not betrayal. This is not abandonment of your responsibilities or your love. This is return. This is remembering. This is the moment you stop being a visitor in your own life and become a resident again. So come home. Unfold the map you buried. Chart the territory you forgot. Draw the boundaries you need. Mark the places that nourish you. Name the things that matter. And this time, when you arrive, stay. Stay with yourself. Stay for yourself. You have been gone long enough.